Hey, we're live on YouTube. I'm just going to send this link to all our WhatsApp groups.
Radhika, I will need the screen pretty much right away. I mean the PowerPoint. The PowerPoint.
Okay.
In just a few minutes, what I'm saying.
Yes. Okay. I send the YouTube link to our WhatsApp group so people can use that. We have 25 participants in our Zoom call. Would you like me to go ahead and start the screen share?
Yes.
Okay, Master, 9:30. Would you like to begin?
Yes. Hare Krishna, everyone. Nice to be back with all of you. And today we will cover chapter 2 of Canto 1. So before I begin, let me do the invocation. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, in the first chapter, we had heard an exciting story had started. The sages, 80,000 sages, had gathered together to do a fire sacrifice. And why? Because Kali Yuga had arrived. And there was a wonderful description, a very not so welcoming description of Kali Yuga, where it said that the maximum duration of life for human beings is going to be only 50 years, and qualities such as religion, truthfulness, cleanliness, tolerance, mercy, duration of life, physical strength, and memory will diminish day by day because of the influence of Kali Yuga. So in this condition, the sages had approached after they, finished a 1,000-year sacrifice. Sutta Goswami came in, and they were very eager to hear for him to answer their 6 questions. As you can see on the board, on the PowerPoint, the 6 questions that they asked. Now we have to consider that. That there are, in the first canto, there are 3 speakers, basically. There's 3 sets of speakers. There's Narad Muni and Vyasadeva, and then Sukadeva Gosvami and Parikshit, and Parikshit Maharaj and Sutta Goswami and the sages. Now this, what Sutta Goswami is going to narrate is something that he's going to narrate the Srimad Bhagavatam that he heard from Sukadeva Goswami. Now, when we look at these 3 sets of people, we can understand that among all these 3 sets, Parikshit Maharaj and Sukadeva Goswami on the Uttama level, very, very advanced level. Because the sages, they were initially doing the yagya for Swarga, for going to the heavenly planets, and later on, as their hearts changed and they heard the Srimad Bhagavatam. And Vyasadeva and Narad Muni, Vyasadeva approached Narad Muni in a state of despondency and dissatisfaction about his devotional service. But how did Parikshit Maharaj approach Sukadeva Goswami? He was sitting with a copen. He was sitting in class, and he had no food or water for the last 7 days. In other words, he was completely in the mood of renunciation. So in this condition, in this background of detachment, we can see that first canto is very special. Generally, when we approach Srimad Bhagavatam, we are very hesitant to do the first two cantos, even some parts of third canto, because there's so much of the technical stuff there. And we would rather do all the stories. But if we go through that austerity of understanding the first canto and the second canto, then we will actually benefit a lot. We will actually benefit a lot because it sets the foundation, it sets the scene, the mood in which this conversation took place. And most of all, what comes through is the compassion of the pure devotees. How even though they were on the level of the 10th canto, and they had actually nothing to do with these basic questions, that sages are asking, yet they were discussing this, and out of compassion for those who are in this material world and who are suffering. So in this scenario, the sages find it their great fortune that that Sutta Goswami is there, a representative, a disciple of Sukadeva Goswami himself. We heard in the last chapter his qualifications, how they were glorifying his qualifications, how he was well versed in Vedanta, but most of all, how he was such a good disciple of his own guru. So, and the compassion that we see in Sukadeva Goswami, the same compassion we see in the sages, when they are eager to help the people of Kali Yuga. And because people in Kali Yuga are unfit to practice spiritual life, their questions are very, very deep as to the purpose of life. What are these 6 questions? Considering that Kali Yuga is getting so degraded as time is going on, they wanted to know what is the ultimate good for all people, and also what is the essence of all scriptures. The third question is that why did Krishna come as the son of Devaki and Vasudeva? For after all, when a great personality comes and visits the prison house, which is the material world, people will naturally ask, what is he doing there? Why has he come? What is his purpose in coming? So that question is also answered in this chapter, besides the first 2 questions. Then they also asked about the different incarnations that Krishna takes for the purpose of creation, maintenance, and destruction. In other words, the 3 Purusha avatars. Then also the 5th question was the Leela avatars of Krishna that enchant the people of this material world and attract them to want to go back to Godhead. And the last question is that now that Krishna has left, and he has taken with him all piety, all knowledge, all religion, where will be the shelter for all of us? Religion means light, and Kali means darkness, which means ignorance. So when for example, when the sun sets, then there's a moment, an interesting moment when it's gone, but there's still light. But after some time, even that light vanishes. So as Kali Yuga is approaching, going further and further in, then even that light vanishes, and the demoniac forces become strong. The Rakshasas, they increase in power. So therefore the sages ask the questions, when will the light come? Where will we find this light, the knowledge? So in this chapter, it's such a wonderful chapter. 4 of these questions will be answered. First of all, it begins with Sutta Goswami being very, very pleased with these questions. He starts by glorifying the sages for asking such good questions. And he's very happy to answer them. Because actually, a devotee, whenever he gets an opportunity to glorify Krishna, he becomes very satisfied and very pleased. Now, in the second verse, Sutta Goswami, he begins by offering his obeisances to Sukadeva Goswami, and he glorifies him. I would like to read the translation for this. Sutta Goswami said, "Let me offer my respectful obeisances unto that great sage, Sukadeva Goswami, who can enter the hearts of all. When he went away to take up the renounced order of life, sannyas, leaving home without undergoing reformation by the sacred thread or the ceremonies observed by the higher castes, his father Vyasadeva, fearing separation from him, cried out, 'O my son, indeed only the trees which were absorbed in the same feelings of separation echoed in response to the bereaved father.' So now he's offering obeisances to the person from whom he heard Bhagavatam from. There are many things that he's going to glorify about Sukadeva Goswami, many of his great qualities. And one of those great qualities is that when he was so young, he took to the renounced order of life. If you've heard the story of Sukadeva Goswami, he was in the womb of his mother and he would not come out for 16 years. And Lord Krishna had to assure him that he will not fall into Maya. And so he came out. And as soon as he came out, he just walked out away from home. And his father was running after him, calling him back, 'Oh, my son.' And when he was calling back, only the trees echoed his cry. And it is said, the acharyas say that that actually it was not the trees, because trees are dull by nature, but it was the Sukadeva Goswami who entered the trees. And so in other words, a pure devotee, the point is being made that the pure devotee can even enter the hearts of conditioned living entities, even like trees, even dull trees. And so here Sutta Goswami, he's praying to Sukadeva Goswami that just like you entered the hearts of the trees, please enter my heart, so that I can also, you can inspire me to speak. In other words, a person who's realized, assimilated this knowledge of Srimad Bhagavatam, when he speaks, Sukadeva Goswami is speaking through him, because he's the original speaker of Srimad Bhagavatam. I know that's an interesting story of how he's Radharani's parrot, right? And he takes messages from Radharani to Krishna. So when Radharani was winding up her pastime on this planet, she was going back, she told Shuka, the parrot, to stay back and not to come with her, and he was very distressed. So Radharani told him that, don't worry, you just stay where my glories are being recited, and you will not feel separation from me. And so he kept looking for a place where Srimad Bhagavatam was being recited. And so he went to Lord Shiva's planet, and there he was reciting this Bhagavatam to his wife, Parvati. And while he was reciting, Parvati fell asleep. And Shuka, he was hiding in a tree above, under which Lord Shiva was sitting. And while, Parvati was listening, she would, from time to time, she would give the hunkar, like that, meaning to say, I'm listening. And then eventually she stopped saying because she fell asleep. So Shuka, he started doing that for her. And Lord Shiva thought that she's listening, and he kept reciting the whole Bhagavatam. So after he finished, then, Parvati woke up and she says, and he said, how did you like the Bhagavatam? And he said, well, I'm so sorry, but I fell asleep. And he says, but who was the one who was doing And he looked, and they looked around, and they found this parrot, and Lord Shiva got really upset because he thought, well, if somebody not qualified hears Bhagavatam, they're going to misuse it. So he started chasing the parrot and trying and killing with the trident to kill it. And Shuka kept flying and flying out of fear. And then he went into the Himalayas and went into the ashram of Vyasadeva. And he was reciting the Bhagavatam to his wife. And while he was reciting, his wife opened her mouth to yawn, and he went in hiding into her mouth. And that's where he took birth in Vyasadeva's womb, a wife's womb. So this is the story, very nice story of Sukadeva Goswami and how he appeared on this planet. So in this way, the trees were responding because Sukadeva Goswami had entered the hearts of those trees, those dull trees. And so in this way, his qualities are being highlighted. Another quality is that because he's so elevated, he doesn't need samskaras. He doesn't need any reformatory purification processes to get purified. Because after all, a Vaishnava is already, is already a Brahmana, and so and of course he was an exceptional Vaishnava. So, and bhakti can purify anyone, even the very lowest. And so in this way, Vyasadeva is calling out to his son in separation, but this separation, we have to understand, is not a material separation, but rather it's a separation on a spiritual level. Then also he glorifies Sukadeva Goswami as being the master of all munis or sages. In the assembly, there were personalities like Narad Muni and his own father, Vyasadeva, and he was the master of all of them. When Parikshit Maharaj, he went to the bank of the Ganges after he was cursed to die, then he asked the sages, before Sukadeva Goswami came, 2 questions: how to live in this world and how to leave this world. And none of these sages could answer those questions. So when Sukadeva Goswami enters, they knew that he's the authority for answering those questions. So he becomes the guru of all the sages. And last of all, but most importantly, he's compassionate to all the conditioned souls. He's very, very merciful. And so in this way, he's been glorified. So the reason why he's known as compassionate is because Sukadeva Goswami was such an elevated soul. He was on such a high platform, right? On such a high and pure platform. But yet he came down to the level of the very basics so that he could give us this knowledge. And now this requires a lot of patience. We see how even Vidura and Maitreya Muni, Vidura was on a very high platform, and so was Maitreya Muni, but he was asking questions of creation from Maitreya Muni. And Maitreya Muni was answering those questions. So this is all symptoms of compassion. And they were talking about creation, destruction, geography of the material world, all these things. So now, so in other words, if we just simply have a desire to get out of this material world, then we are considered very fortunate. The problem in Kali Yuga is that people don't even have a desire to want to get out of this material world. They don't even have a desire to get out of their homes or their comfortable, life. What to speak of getting out of the material world? But if we have this desire to get out of this material world, then we can take advantage of these compassionate souls who are willing to give all this knowledge to us. And we see in the scriptures many, many nice examples of compassion, many examples. Like the Dichi Muni in the 6th canto, we see how he was willing to give up his life so that the demigods could make a thunderbolt out of his bones. He had no qualms about it. Immediately, he was willing to do that. So these are the glorious activities of personalities. So in this way, we can see the beautiful qualities. Then in the verses 6 and 7, they answer the first two questions of the sages. What is the ultimate good for all people? And what is the essence of all scriptures? Let me read that. Very nice verse. The supreme occupation for all humanity is that by which men can attain to loving devotional service unto the transcendental Lord. Such devotional service must be unmotivated and uninterrupted to completely satisfy the self. So there's 2 points here. First of all, there is swadharma, which is our material duties, and there is parodharma, which is our devotional duties. So parodharma is like sadhana bhakti, and that takes priority over our swadharma. So, so that is our main occupation. That is our main duty in life. And how do we do that? After all, we have material duties as well. The key thing is how to channel everything that we do in terms of our material duties, in terms of taking care of our household life, taking care of society, our community, our social obligations, and to connect them to Krishna, to do it in such a way that we please the Lord. So in order to, and how to please the Lord, such devotional service must be unmotivated and uninterrupted. So in this part, it becomes a very interesting discussion that we can have with children in terms of unmotivated and uninterrupted. Examples of service which is unmotivated and uninterrupted. Right? Uninterrupted, a good example would be Prahlad. In spite of all the torture that he received from his father, his devotional service did not stop. He was so determined, right? and he continued to do that. And for example, in the story of Dhruva Maharaj, how he was initially had material desires, but later on his desires became purified and it became unmotivated. In other words, we cannot, at this point at our platform, we cannot have unmotivated. It's hard for us to do unmotivated devotional service. But taking the example of Dhruva Maharaj, if we approach all our desires in a way to please Krishna, those very same desires become purified and they become unmotivated. So also, bhakti, we have to understand, is this verse is bringing home the point that bhakti is so powerful, devotional service is so powerful that it's actually, conquers all obstacles. It is the cause of bhakti is really bhakti itself. In other words, the other factors like association of devotees, the association of the Lord, all these things are help in that towards bhakti. But actually, bhakti can be caused only by bhakti. When there was bhakti, Prahlad received bhakti from Narad Muni because he had bhakti in his heart, right? So in other words, no amount of material obstacles will stop a person from doing bhakti. In other words, it's independent of all causes. It's causeless. So in this way, King Yayati is a good example. I was thinking where he was inspired he was affected by the bhakti in the heart of Ambarish Maharaj, where he gave up his attachment to his wife and was able to take this renounced path. So in this way, the process of doing bhakti is being emphasized here. And also unmotivated examples we can ask the children would be the Pandavas, inspired whether they were in a castle, living in a castle, or they were in out in the forest. Their bhakti was uninterrupted. Their attachment to Krishna, and it was always unmotivated and uninterrupted. The Brajvasis is such a good example of unmotivated bhakti. Right? And such devotional service, it says, it leads, which is the next slide, it leads to knowledge and detachment. Such devotional service automatically leads to knowledge and detachment. In other words, knowledge and detachment do not give us bhakti, but bhakti leads to knowledge and detachment. And now I was thinking a good example would be Arjuna. He initially he did not want to fight. He was telling Krishna that actually I'm willing to die. I absolutely have no attraction for the kingdom. I'm willing to die. But it's better that I die rather than to kill so many of my relatives. But that same bhakti, when Krishna, that same mood, when Krishna reformed that mood and told him, no, you fight, but you fight for me, that gave him knowledge and detachment. So he fought for Krishna. In other words, his material desires became purified. So in other words, devotional service must be to please Krishna. All activities, yoga, austerities, everything is meant to satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Or else, this is a very nice verse, which is verse 8, wherein is pointed out by Sukadeva Gosvami that if we don't do work for Krishna, they become useless. And we have such good examples that we can tell the children, examples such as Hiranyakashipu and Ravan. They did so much austerities, so much, they did so much, tapasya. But what happened? They were useless. In the end, Hiranyakashipu and Ravan, they lost their life and they lost everything. They lost their kingdom. But Prahlad, his son, he got everything. He inherited everything. And it was effortless what he got. He didn't even work for it. And Ravan lost everything, but his brother, being a devotee of Lord Ram, got everything. So desire should be so another point that is being pointed out in the later verses, that we should desire only enough where we can put our body and soul together, and not for sense gratification. Prabhupada writes how, sense gratification is like salt. If we take too much of it, we don't. It's painful, it's tasteless, right? And if we take very little of it, then we don't like it. I mean, it's not tasteful, right? So in other words, if we deny ourselves completely having this material body, then our hearts can become very, very hard. So we become envious of others who are, having sense gratification. And we see that sometimes in the life of devotees, when we first come to Krishna consciousness, we become very, inspired to practice, to become pure devotees right away. And then we want to follow, strictly everything. And, we don't want to even eat or drink during Ekadashi, which is very nice to aim at, but then we may not be at that platform, right? And so what happens is when the heart becomes very hard, then we start getting angry and envious of others who are doing it and start criticizing them. So too little of it is a problem, and too much of it, obviously, we know that it's a huge problem. So in this way, do everything. The best way is to actually take what we need to put our body and soul together and to do everything for Krishna. For example, and this is so easy that even a child can do it, right? Cooking, cleaning, singing, all this can be done for Krishna. Otherwise, Sukadeva Goswami is saying in verses 8, 9, and 10 that they all become shramahi kevalam, useless. And then he concludes in verse 14 how one must hear, glorify, remember, and worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And in this way, we can cut the knot of reactionary work. Okay, so with children, this can be a lot of fun activities, a lot of discussion, and also we can have, we can make a daily chart where we put, where we can, monitor, what every day we all do in terms of the areas of hearing, chanting, glorifying, and whether we are fulfilling these purposes of remembering Krishna every day and dovetailing all our activities for Krishna. So after that, starting text 16 to about 22, Sukadeva Goswami takes us to the 9 stages of bhakti, which is very interesting because children, they can grasp quite a bit of that, once we give them some examples. And I was thinking a nice example would be the example of book distribution, where children, if and we can tell them how when a devotee goes on book distribution and he gives a book to someone, then that's his devotional life begins. His devotional life begins where he develops some faith, and he gets the association of devotees. He may come to the temple, he may associate, and he becomes further and further inclined, right? And then, of course, once he takes shelter of spiritual master, then the process of purifying the heart begins, where Krishna says in this chapter, he himself cleans the heart of such a devotee who has accepted the process of serving the book Bhagavata and the person Bhagavata. So if either one of these processes can take us all the way to bhava and prema, from ruchi, asakti, bhava, and prema. So out of the two, the person Bhagavata is very, very important, because the person Bhagavata, he carries the book Bhagavata with him. And so therefore, by serving him in a submissive way, and performing menial tasks by which we give up our false sense of pride, really our process of purification really develops into attraction, attraction for the Lord, which is ruchi, taste for the Lord, attraction for the Lord, which is ruchi. Now, ruchi doesn't necessarily mean attachment, it means attraction. And gradually that attraction becomes attachment. Attachment means when we cannot live without Krishna, when we are always thinking of Krishna, and that's our sakti. And then it fans out into bhava and prem, where the devotee is completely absorbed in Krishna's remembrance of Krishna. And we see many, many examples. So the way to inspire our children is to give examples and to ask them for examples. For example, so many personalities in the Bhagavatam who are on the level of bhava, right? Who are on the level of bhava. We can give examples. King Bharat on the level of bhava. Right? Of course, Narad Muni on the level of prema. So in this way, we can give them examples and explain to them as the stories as well, whereby they can get inspired. So in this, in verse 24, for example, the next slide, 3 modes of material nature, it talks about how Krishna, for the purpose of creation, maintenance, and destruction, he accepts the 3 modes of material nature. And I was thinking it's a nice analogy which can be shared with our children, right? Because this analogy is very, very instructive in teaching children, how to understand spiritual concepts through material examples. Otherwise, it's very hard, because we are in this conditioned state where we cannot understand spiritual matters. Just to understand that we are the soul and not this body requires a lot of depth, and it's not easy. So Prabhupada uses the analogy of the car and the driver to bring home that point. And in the same way, an analogy is being used here to explain how the different types of modes, how goodness is represented by fire, passion, smoke, and ignorance by the firewood. So out of the 3, the fire is the most important, because firewood in itself cannot do much. But then when we light the fire, there's smoke. In other words, there's some activity in the smoke, right? And of course, fire is better than smoke. So in this way, children can understand the 3 modes, and they can understand through this analogy how, among the 3 modes, goodness is the best. And then when we come to the level of goodness, can we transcend that to come to the level of pure goodness? The acharyas, they talk about how, obviously we understand that, ignorance is represented by Lord Shiva and passion by Brahma, but Lord Shiva is higher than Brahma. So how do we understand this analogy? And then they explain that how the firewood is more actually valuable than the smoke. Because from the firewood, if you light it, you can cook and use it, right? But with the smoke, it's not of much value, right? So in this way, there's different ways to see this analogy. So the children get a sense. They learn how to do abstract thinking, and they really benefit greatly. Now, this analogy is quite difficult, but we have other analogies that pretty much in every chapter, there's so many of them that help the child understand these spiritual concepts, these abstract concepts in a very effortless way. Then the next point is made here. See, after Sutta Goswami takes us through the 9 stages of bhakti, then after he takes us through the process of devotional service, how that's the essence of all scriptures, and that's the ultimate purpose in life is to do devotional service. Then he explains that who we should do the devotional service to, and of course the 9 stages of bhakti. Then he explains who we should do the devotional service for, right? And who should it not be directed to. And in this slide, we are talking about how one should not worship the demigods, and why. They should be, first of all, the point is made that demigods should be respected. They're not to be disrespected because they are empowered servants of the Lord. They must be respected. But respected does not mean that we worship them, right? And there's several reasons why. Because they cannot give us liberation. Cannot. Now, this I thought very nice example is the story of Dhruva Maharaj, where Queen Suniti, she directs Dhruva Maharaj to go to the Lord, to find the Lord in the forest, and to present to him his material desires. And she discourages him from going to any of the lesser gods, because she says that nobody can you fulfill your desires except for the Lord, and the demigods can only fulfill desires only if Krishna wants them to benedict their worshippers with those desires, with those benedictions. Right? So she makes a very important point, and she glorifies this the Supreme Personality of God in this way. And the demigods are not masters, are not really pure masters, because they keep us entangled. They have a selfish motive. Somebody who has a selfish motive cannot be a pure master. Like Prahlad says in the 7th canto, in his prayers to Lord Nrsimhadev, that why are you attracting me? Why are you attracting me with these material benedictions? I want to be your pure servant, and you are my pure master. A pure master does not give his servant things that is going to be detrimental for the servant. So in this way, the demigods keep us entangled in this material world, because we cannot, our desires are not fulfilled. They do not get purified. So in this way, we can explain, and this is a very nice thing, and Radhika Mataji will expand on some activities that we have in the guidebook, which is very interesting about this topic. So in all the topics that I have been speaking about, there's a few activities there in the guidebook, which helps the child further, which helps the mother or the teacher elaborate on those points, on those themes, and for the child to understand and digest easily. And then the last point is that how the demigods, they work under Krishna. In other words, they cannot do without his sanction. And of course, with this many nice stories. Lord Shiva, he gave a benediction to Vrikasura, and with the result that Vrikasura was running after him to kill him. And he was running for his dear life. And then Lord came as a young Brahman boy, and he tricked Vrikasura into touching his own head, which burst into pieces. So like this, we have many wonderful, I just thought of a story, Banasura, where he was Lord Shiva's devotee, very faithful devotee. And in the end, he was defeated. Lord Shiva and Lord Vishnu had a fight, and Lord Shiva was defeated by Lord Vishnu. So ultimately, these demigods are not supreme. Okay. So now I was talking to you, mentioning how Sutta Goswami is taking us through this process of understanding, the greatness of bhakti itself, and then to understand who these bhakti should be given to, and not to the demigods. So who is the recipient for a bhakti? It is Vasudev. And this is such a wonderful verse on verse 28 on the glories of Vasudev. How Vasudev is the object of all knowledge, Vasudev is the object of all sacrifices, Vasudev is the object of all yoga, Vasudev is the object of all activities, Vasudev is the object of all austerities, Vasudev is the object of all religion, and he is the supreme goal of life. So this is a very interesting, and we can take our children through all of this, have a very animated discussion on each one of them, give examples, and the examples will bring everything back to life, will bring things to life. And I won't go into the details of all of this, but I'm sure you can think of so many different examples where Krishna is the recipient of all these. Now, next is then answering the fourth question, which is here the Sukadeva Gosvami is going to answer the fourth question of a description about Purusha avatars, in what way the Lord creates, maintains, and destroys the three Purusha avatars. Now, we won't go into detail over here because this very topic is discussed more in detail in the third chapter, which is coming up next week. But we can definitely make it very interesting for our children because it's a very colorful story. It's a very colorful story. We can actually, visually, we can help them understand how Mahavishnu is one, because all these universes are coming from Mahavishnu, as bubbles, from the pores of his skin, they're coming. From his breathing, they're coming, right? And each of these bubbles expand into one universe, and into that universe, another Vishnu enters, another expansion of Mahavishnu, and that's Garbhodakshaya Vishnu. So there are that many Garbhodakshaya Vishnus as many of universes, millions of universes. And then it expands again into Kshirodakshaya Vishnu, and this is the Vishnu that enters into the heart of every living entity. And these are billions and billions of Kshirodakshaya Vishnu. So in other words, Vishnu is everywhere. Krishna is everywhere. There's nothing but Krishna or his energies. And that was discussed in the last chapter, how, because Krishna enters into the heart of everything, or even dead matter, is part of his energy. And this is a very important point that we can bring home to our children, that to give them the understanding that no matter what they see or do is part of Krishna's energy, and to help them understand that nothing is separate from him. Nothing is separate from him. And this really helps when we actually remind them all day, how it's either Krishna or his energy that we are facing. We ourselves are Krishna's energy, separated energy, but we also are coming from Krishna. So we can help them do that. Then the last slide is about answering the third question. Now, it is not, so the questions are being answered not chronologically, but logically. In other words, first we have to hear about Krishna's Purusha avatars, how he creates, maintains, and destroys. And then we can hear that, then we need to know about why did Krishna come to this material world? What was the reason of his coming? Like I mentioned earlier, he's such a great personality. Why would he want to come here and be among us? What business does he have here? Because all his devotees are in the spiritual world. And so the reason is because he's of his compassion, because he wants to take every conditioned soul back to Godhead. And due to that, he enacts different pastimes to attract the hearts of devotees. And the fact that he does that, it shows his patience, tolerance, and humility. Because For example, a good example would be if you have a relationship with somebody and that, a person, maybe a friend, and that friend keeps on doing things which we don't like, which is against our interest, maybe once, twice, maybe 10 times, are we going to be able to maintain that friendship? Whether our desires may be correct or not, but it's going to be very hard to maintain that friendship, right? So imagine Krishna, he's keeping friends with us. He's within our hearts, even though we've neglected him for millions and millions of years. He still stays with us. So that's the compassion. That is why Krishna comes, because he's so eager to relieve us from our suffering and take us home back to Godhead. And for that, he's willing to come again and again in his so many avatars to attract our hearts to him. So I'm going to stop here, Radhika, and give it over to you to do the second part, please.
Okay, thank you, Mataji. So, devotees, thank you again for being on. We have 30 people on YouTube, 50 people on Zoom, and of course, a lot of people watch these later because the timings don't suit. So we're very grateful to you for continuing with us the second week. And my part here is going to be to share the activities from the guidebook and the resources that are in there to make this chapter 2 very fun and relatable for children. So give me just a second to share my screen. Okay, so just a reminder again, so the model that Urdhva Mataji has developed and honed over the years that I use as well is that we sit down as parents and with our child or children and we read the translations of the second chapter with our children, and hopefully as parents or teachers we have read the purpose in advance and brought these points of discussion that Mataji just brought forth from Prabhupada's purpose. Hopefully we've had this discussion with them already, and now we're ready to go to the guidebook. So Canto 1, Srimad Bhagavatam, a comprehensive guide for you. And let's open chapter 2, Divinity and Divine Service. And what I really, the book starts with a story summary, which is very easy to read, and it's like a dialogue and has words that are easy for children to understand. So, just as an example, Sukadeva Gosvami smiled at the sages with great satisfaction. He was very pleased with their questions. The sages had asked Sukadeva Gosvami what the people of Kali Yuga should do to become fully happy in the heart. This is a perfect question. Thank you, exclaimed Sukadeva Gosvami. So you can see there is some literary license used here, which is perfectly fine. The story is being summarized for a younger audience. But again, it makes it very fun for children. Over on the second part of my slide, you can see, let me explain more, continued Sukadeva Goswami to the sages. You see, if we always hear about Krishna, talk about him, remember him, worship him, and always serve his dear devotees, we'll begin to feel something very special happening in our hearts. We begin to feel, I love Krishna. So it's just the whole story presented very nicely. And the person that put this together and was edited further, her name is Linda Kishori, and she, like I shared last time.
Hare Krishna, everybody.
Hare Krishna, everybody.
This is Brinda and
Lily.
well, today we'll be going through the people of Kali can do so they're happy. Sukadeva Goswami smiled. He was very excited because he knew the answer. But he said, you know what, before I answer you, he had a few people he wanted to thank. Because if it weren't for these special personalities, he wouldn't have known the answer either. So he put his hands together and thought of Sukadeva Goswami.
Okay, so I'll pause that there. So you can go to SoundCloud and you can find all of Vinda Kishori's albums that are recorded there. So here's a picture from my Sunday school where my son and another student, they're reading this story summary. This is from last year. And again, as I mentioned last time, the book works well whether you're reading at home with your child or you have a Sunday school kind of environment. There's a little bit of noise there. Okay, muted. So after the story summary, we find key messages, and this is a really nice way where verses have been put together. So honestly, this is I find more useful as a parent to understand, and myself in my own reading of Srimad Bhagavatam to understand the flow of the verses and understand the key themes. So you'll find that list there, and we have verses that can be memorized, either related to every chapter or directly taken from that chapter. So you can see these two verses here, Savaipum Samparo Dharma and Srimatan Swakatha Krishna, very important verses, and encouragement that the child of the multiple choice questions. Nice cartoon there. Hello, we show these books to everyone. We're showing these books to everyone today. They bring peace and happiness and relieve us from suffering. Wow, cool. So, nice cartoon there. And then questions for the children to answer, a couple that are not multiple choice, but most that are multiple choice. And the children always enjoy doing these with, we'll have A, B, C cards, and everybody hold up a card and say what the answer is. So there are fun ways to do this. And the higher thinking questions are really nice because I try to read these higher thinking questions in advance and ask them during the time that we're actually reading from Prabhupada's book. So I'll note down the higher thinking questions next to the particular verse. And again, this is a nice way to encourage deeper thinking, critical thinking in children. And it's nice that as a parent, you don't have to come up with these. They've already been in the book. So an important concept in chapter 2 is about rendering seva. So this is a very nice activity that we did where you write down a list of different service ideas that you can do to Krishna or his devotees, and you cut them up in strips of paper and you put them in a jar. And then every day you pull out an activity and then you do that. So it could be cleaning the temple room. Oh, yeah, I got to clean the temple room. And then, discussion after that week of, okay, so what was the result of serving devotees? Very sweet activity there. And then also in this chapter included is encouragement to do research on the Bhagavatam. Give a Bhagavatam class, and it really lists out very nicely, how to consider your audience, how to bring examples and analogies. So it's very nice training, and we did this at home where, we just, three of us gave Bhagavatam classes to each other from chapter. This one is a nice activity where you match. So Mataji was speaking about the modes of material nature, which I mentioned in chapter 2. And this is a nice way to bring it down to the child's level where they're able to draw lines and match the mode of nature that a person would be in and what kind of life they would live. And then an extension activity Mataji gives down here is to see what kind of diet people in the mode. As I mentioned, the book is adaptable for all ages, and it's really nice that like my younger children can be coloring while I'm discussing the bird and the birdcage example with older children. And again, I don't as a teacher have to come up with a curriculum, whether at home or in Sunday school, and the prompt questions are already given here. So, the tutorial method of discussing Srimad Bhagavatam and asking deeper questions and probing further to really help the child assimilate the message and imbibe the values of the Bhagavatam. So the bird in the cage example, you can ask the child, so who is this, pointing to the bird, and what does the cage refer to in the analogy? And should we clean the cage? And if we clean the cage, would the bird be happy? So then what else does the bird need? And bringing them to the point of conclusion. And a lot of these I just use as prompts. I don't actually literally go through bullet by bullet. These are really good prompts. I don't have a picture of this, but we did this fun activity where you make two hearts, and a clean heart and a dirty heart. And the dirty heart, we put cardamom and nutmeg powder and, you know, all kinds of dirty things on, and also some soil, I think. And then the clean heart has a picture of Krishna in the center, with the written comments around the picture on how to have a clean heart, such as by rendering different types of devotional service. So you see how, you know, children really need to feel, touch, craft, you know, they really need all this. They can't just reach with Bhagavatam and get the message, right? So this brings it to a practical level for them doing these kind of activities. In the book are resources. So at the back of every chapter, there'll be resources that are related to certain activities. So this is related to the process of purification and identifying the stages that one goes through, and then using these boxes, to the smaller boxes, you write down the stages, and the larger boxes, you know, the younger children can just draw pictures to symbolize the stages that Mataji just went through in her PowerPoint, and the older children can perhaps write. Mataji mentioned the activity about, or the concept that is introduced. Sorry, I think you can hear the screaming. I have two boys. You can hear, okay, I lost my train of thought there. So Mataji mentioned the demigods, and, you know, whether we should worship demigods, or who should we worship and why not worship the demigods is presented. So again, now how do we take this down to the level of the child? So this is a nice activity where we investigate which demigods are worshipped by those in the different modes. And then we find details on each demigod. So, you know, going through different pastimes of Srimad Bhagavatam, hearing classes, and coming up with a mini fact file. I know for my younger one, it was just drawing pictures to illustrate the different methods of worshiping, you know, like Brakasura was cutting off his throat to worship Lord Shiva, whereas worshippers of Vishnu don't do that kind of worship. So he just drew a picture, and the older ones can actually write. This is a really nice activity, 3 aspects of God, because the chapter discusses Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. The resource given at the end of the chapter where you're supposed to color attributes of Bhagavan in red, Paramatma in orange, and Brahman in yellow. So for instance, you would color full knowledge is a characteristic of Bhagavan. You would color that in red. Full beauty, you know, and then resides in the heart would be Paramatma, so that would be colored in orange. And again, it really helps to stimulate good discussion. A nice resource to track different services. So you come up with different kinds of services that we can render to Krishna, and then for the whole week, and I had my Sunday school students do this and bring it back, you know, bring their book back the following Sunday, and we discussed what did they do on Monday to hear about Krishna, or who did they hear about, or what did they hear about, or how did they remember Krishna on Tuesday or Wednesday. A nice activity. Lots of writing activities that help to improve grammar, vocabulary, spelling, and I'm not going to go through everything, but, you know, writing your own story summary, or in your own language, retelling a part of the chapter, or the reading comprehension 3-2-1 was fun too, where we write 3. Just 1 second. 2 interesting things and why, and 1 question that you still have, and 3 things that you found out from the chapter. Word game, you write Krishna cleanses our heart on a whiteboard, and then you take those words and you try to make as many different words from it as you can, like sun, clean, earth, fill in the blanks, to understand to or to. So again, you know, this is teaching English through our scriptures. So when do you use the word TO and when do you use the word TOO? And a really nice activity there. Most of the chapters have keywords where you try to look them up in the dictionary and you write their definition, or you make a new a word search, and the children try to search for the I have to search for those words. And then this was a really fun one, theatrical activity. So you can do it with puppets. We did it in class, enacting out each scene, and you can see two students here. This is a really nice play. Once upon a time, many years ago, the sages of Naimisharanya forest asked the great and powerful sage Sukadeva Gosvami what the people of Kali Yuga should do to become fully happy in their hearts. The narrator says that, and then we have a few sages you can see in scene 2, and their whole script is written out, and there's even a song in between for the children to sing, and the children really had a great time with this drama. And then we move on to scene 3, where Sukadeva Gosvami is giving some answers, and scene 4, where the narrator says, "Thank you for watching our play. Our request before you leave this day, remember Krishna in your heart, and today make a fresh new start." So you could do it as a show or as a drama. And this is a poem that's in the script, but it's also a beautiful poem that's separately included, Temple of the Heart. Before reciting Srimad Bhagavatam, 4 special things must always be done to offer my obeisances unto these personalities. So I don't really have a tune for this, but these poems are nice if they're just sung, like a poem without a particular tune even. First is to Narayan, the Supreme Lord. Second is Nara, the best human of all. Third is Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning. And fourth is to the author, Vyasadeva. And this paragraph, we really had fun with this paragraph here because I told the children to be the chorus. So I would say Srimad Bhagavatam, and they would all say, bright as the sun. And I would say Srimad Bhagavatam, and they would respond, saves everyone, Srimad Bhagavatam. So you can make it really, really fun. And always answers are included at the end. The person leading the discussion, please, via Amazon in the United States. And you will notice, and I got several questions after last week's presentation. So yes, Amazon does have Cantos split up for first and third. And we have a new publisher in India. They're combined, and this is the revised version where you have Canto 1, Canto 2, Canto 3. And the prices are down here. I can send out this link to order the books and also this number to receive a 10% discount for the first 108 orders. And that brings me to the end of my sharing of Art of Teach Chapter 2. Thank you, Master.
Thank you, Radhika. Very nice. So now Radhika Mataji has gone through, now she's doing 3rd canto. So you can see how far she is into it. And she hasn't stopped, and she finds it very, very useful.
Yeah, we really spend, like a week every chapter because we read Prabhupada's book one day, and then the rest of the, days of the week, we actually just delve into these activities. So we're going slow, but we're really enjoying Bhagavatam together.
Thank you, Radhika. And we can now open it up for questions. We want to give now we have half hour to devote to questions.
Yes. So we have a question from YouTube from Shyama Saki, who is also another organizer and founder of Vaishnav Academy along with me, our homeschool co-op. So Shyama Saki says, wanted to ask if the children don't already know the story of Dhruva, would you tell that example, or would you save that for later when we cover the Dhruva story?
Well, devotee children who grow up in the movement, they have all heard of Dhruva's. So most of them have heard of Dhruva's story. So these become very common stories to refer to. And sometimes during my seminars and workshops teaching parents and teachers how to teach Srimad Bhagavatam, I do mention that initially it's okay to do a few stories before you go to the 1st canto, just to get the children attracted to Srimad Bhagavatam. So in that way, I did do that process with many children, and this way they learned some some stories. Otherwise, I tell them the stories at that point sometimes, or I skip them. So we have to see. But popular stories, most of them have known. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to invite Mataji from Boston, another very dear friend of mine, also a homeschooling mom, to please ask her question.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Arudha Mataji and Sri Radhika Mataji. Wonderful presentation. My question is, if we have to use this for Sunday school, Sri Radhika Mataji saw that some kids were coloring the temple, they colored the temple and the parrot in the cage. So would you take copies of that page? Would you take print out, not print out, like make copies of that page and distribute, or how would you do that?
No, these are workbooks, and each child, I for my Sunday school, this is a required textbook. So every parent buys it, and I always say we can offer financial assistance if needed to buy a book, but we've never had that. And so they color right in that book, and they write right in that book.
So even for your children, you have 2 copies, like one for each?
So my children have multiple copies because my children have done these books at home and they do it in Sunday school. So each of them has 2 copies of every book.
Okay, makes sense. And now I know how many to buy. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I'm going to invite Rayu Mataji to please ask her question.
Hare Krishna Mataji, Dandavat Pranam. Yes, Mataji, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, Mataji, like what I understood from that, I just wanted to clarify that before, like I start, my son is 4.5 years and another one is 2.5 years. So I should start reading from the Prabhupada book. You mean to say the main Bhagavatam that we have? And then we start with the activity book. Is it that, Mataji?
Yes, that is the right process, is to start with, and Radhika Mataji, you do the same, don't you? You read from the translations first, you discuss it, and then you go to the guidebook. Yeah, and this is the process I recommend, because this way Prabhupada's books are very, very potent, and when we read directly from his books, it does something miraculous to all of us, and it also gives a very in-depth understanding of the chapter. The guidebooks are there are meant to supplement what we read from Prabhupada's books, and to also to give the children the opportunity to have to do activities that are fun, and they can understand philosophy in this fun way. Okay.
Thank you for your question. I'm going to take a question from YouTube. Pramod Kumar Bodhanam Prabhu asks, or no, actually he's providing a comment. He says, we have ordered our 4 books. I highly recommend all the viewers to grab this wonderful opportunity. Thank you so much, team, for your efforts and allowing to glorify Srimad Bhagavatam together. Thank you, Prabhu. We have a question from Padmavati Mukundan Mataji. She asks, Arudha Mataji, she's asking, does unmotivated mean bhakti without motivation? I guess
it means bhakti without
clarification.
Yeah.
What is unmotivated bhakti?
Yeah, well, it means bhakti without material motivation. We have to have motivation. We have to have the desire and motivation to want to serve Krishna. So the motivation should not be for gain, for what we can get out of it. And initially, that's how we approach the devotional process. We are not at that pure platform. But so it's better than not doing devotional service. But ultimately, we want to come to the platform of doing it, doing pure bhakti without any tinge of material gain in that. For example, but Krishna likes it. No matter how we approach it, Krishna really likes it. Because even when we bargain with Krishna, where we are doing devotional service for material purposes, Krishna still likes that relationship because there's some relationship there. We accept Krishna as a person, just like a child would demand something from the parents. So Krishna will give. And then gradually we come to the understanding, the awakening that, oh, maybe I can do something. Maybe if Krishna will help me, get this new house or car, and I can maybe, distribute a box of Bhagavad Gitas. So then the serving mode starts coming, where it becomes a little bit less of selfish motivation. And then gradually, as we advance, we actually want to serve without any motivation, selfless, this is called. So that's the idea. So it's okay to start with, with desires of getting something in return. But eventually, that's the message of Srimad Bhagavatam, is that it should be unmotivated and uninterrupted.
Thank you. We have a question from Amrita Namadasi. Hare Krishna Mataji, thank you for the class. I have a 3.5-year-old son. He does not know how to read or write, but understands letters and basics for his age. These activities seem to be very difficult for him to do now. So how do I start with him at this age? Should I read directly from Srimad Bhagavatam and then read from the activity book?
Well, Srimad Bhagavatam, it can be read to him. Like you can pick a story that would be interesting for him. Rajendra story, crocodile story. It starts out pretty in a fun way. The Tirukkada mountains and this elephant, with his heavy steps. It's really actually fascinating. So you can read to him while he listens, and he draws and colors while his ears are listening, and then gradually. And then, of course, he could use the guidebook. Do you have any recommendation for the guidebook for that age, Radhika? Have you tried it?
Yes, I have been doing the guidebooks with children from 1.5, 2 years old, because they have poems and they have the story summary and the activities. They can't write in the book. It's not to be used as a workbook at that age, but the activities like clean heart and pure heart, those kind of activities, or keeping track of your devotion activities throughout the day. So picking a chit out of the jar. And today we're going to clean the temple. Today we're going to do kirtan for the deities. So I've been using these guidebooks from maybe when my children were 1 year old. So I think it can be done. And, yena tena prakarena, whatever means it takes, because little kids, I would give popcorn to my kids to eat. So they're, hearing Bhagavatam, or I would give them Play-Doh to, they need to move their hands, they need to move their mouth. And if their mouth is, moving, then they're usually quiet and their ears are open and they're listening. So use whatever means, to cunningly get them to hear from the Srimad Bhagavatam, as well as do a lot of the activities from the guidebook. Another question from Atulya Mataji. Do you read translations and also purports before we use the guidebook, or only translations?
We read only translations. The children take turns reading translations, and we open it for discussion, and they can bring their own questions in the discussion. But the idea is that if the parent can read, or the teacher can read purports ahead of time. And that's what they do even in the Vrindavan Gurukul. The teachers come a little prepared, and then they make different activities. They use those activities, and so in this way we can do both.
Saki asks, when discussing with the kids, certain points resonate more than others. Is it okay to just focus on those points and maybe not cover all the main points of the chapter?
Yes, it's okay. See, Bhagavatam is taught in layers. It's not like we can give everything to our children at one go. Otherwise it's lacking. No. The child growing up is going to read Bhagavatam several times. This is, we give them at their level of understanding. However, we have to be careful where we don't focus too much on just one topic, because children are generally restless by nature. And so a good pace of moving along is important. We should move along at a good, steady pace, because I've noticed, just with my experience of teaching children over the years, that if you focus too much on one point, then children eventually will get restless, and they'll get terribly restless, and they may lose attraction. So a nice balance of going into depth as well as moving along.
Question about teaching Bhagavatam on Zoom. Can you please elaborate on the activities that can be done via this medium?
Radhika, you want to answer this question?
Okay.
Oh, you mean just reading and discussion, or I think she means the activities.
Activities, yeah. So, I think we all agree that virtual is not our favorite way of doing things, but this is the time and age. What are you going to do? So rather conduct a Bhagavatam discussion and do activities via Zoom, even though I don't find so much rasa in it. Now, I teach every morning. So my Bhagavatam class with my children from 9 to 10 Central Time, I have, other children joining, and we actually do Bhagavatam as well as the guidebook through Zoom. That's our, ever since COVID happened, we've been doing that. And, the other children have really been benefiting that join. And of course, my children are present in person. So we do the exact same thing that Majidji outlined. We read the translations turn by turn. Each child joins from their own device. So if there are two members in one family, it always works better if they have their own device. And after we read Prabhupada's book, then we move to the guidebook and we start with the story summary. We hire thinking questions. The only thing that we don't do through our Zoom discussions are the crafts. Like right now we're on chapter 23 of Canto 3, and Mataji has a nice chapter 22 had making Swayambhu Manu's chariot, and chapter 23 has making an aerial mansion that Kardama Muni takes Devahuti on. And how are you going to do that on Zoom? At least I'm not creative enough. So I just do it with my children at home and then encourage the other children. The template is there in the book, just copy it, cut it, make your chariot. I'm not going to be able to guide you on Zoom, or I choose not to, and make your aerial mansion, So besides that, and even that can be done, but besides that, I think all the activities are translatable if every child has their own guidebook. Okay, the next question. Taking inspiration from Arudha Mataji and Seva Murthy Radhika Mataji, I started Srimad Bhagavatam with my 6-year-old daughter and 2 of her cousins. What should be the approach for this particular age group? They can't read by themselves, but we try to read one verse or a half from Ankur Prabhu.
Yes, I mean, this is a great way of teaching children how to read. I remember, teaching my children how to read, and initially you need books, the basic books of learning how to read. And now we have Urmila Mataji's wonderful Learn to Read series. I don't know if they are available still, but they are just one. No, okay. So if you're teaching children how to read through basic books that you can get from the library or elsewhere on Google, then you can start the Bhagavatam with the child reading just maybe a sentence or two, and it's very purifying. It's actually very purifying, and maybe a sentence or two, and the child feels very accomplished. You applaud the child that, see, you read a line from Prabhupada's translation, and the next day he's going to try 1.5 lines and then 2 lines. And I found this a great way to speedily increase their reading capabilities. I mean, you can try these things because, like I said, they're very purifying. Is that the question? Did I answer it? Yeah.
I think so. Question through YouTube. Mataji, do you organize Bhagavatam reading groups for young readers? I'm from New Jersey and would like to see if my children can join one of these groups.
The Bhagavatam reading as well. I can, I am doing some classes, and we can be in touch, and I can see how many I can, maybe I can add and in my existing groups, but we can be in touch with that. Yes.
So feel free to write to us at Vaishnava Academy, va.iskan@gmail.com if you'd like, and we can forward it on to Mataji. Also, just an encouragement, so Arudha Mataji really encourages this culture of parents and child and building that relationship through reading Bhagavatam. And of course, it's absolutely wonderful if, everybody can join Arudha Mataji's classes, but, there's a capacity and a limit. And therefore, she's trying to empower us all as parents and as teachers to take the system and do, the model and the curriculum is already provided and see if, we're able to do it on our own with our own children and really strengthen our relationship with our own child. So that's not to minimize, Mataji's classes. It's just to, encourage also, pick up the resources that are there and see if you can do it at home.
Yes, I agree with you, Radhika, because my whole purpose of starting this series of classes is to actually encourage parents and teachers to actually take this up and make and to understand and feel that you can actually do it. Anybody can do this. When I first started teaching my children while I was homeschooling them, I read the Bhagavatam with them for the first time. I had not read before. I was a fairly new devotee, and I feel like with my sparse knowledge and experience, I mean, if I was able to inspire them to become lovers of Bhagavatam, then anybody can do it. So.
Okay. Archana Mataji asks, she has a 5-year-old that is starting to read. How do you go or transition from picking and choosing a story and, telling or discussing that to starting a systematic reading, starting with Canto 1?
Mm-hmm. Well, if you're feeling inspired with these sessions, that you can actually begin with Canto 1, Chapter 1, and make it very, very dynamic and creative and interesting, go for it. But if you're feeling unsure, then like I mentioned earlier, just start with a story. Just start with one story, and you could start with the Gajendra, the crocodile story, or Dhruva story. One of those two would be a nice example. And then go back to, and you will know when you're ready for Canto 1. I know one particular group in Pune, there's 3 teachers who started 3 groups, and they began with stories, and now they are, within a couple of months, they are now starting with Canto 1, Chapter 1. So, but they were glad they had done it this way because they themselves were feeling a little unsure. But the purpose of these sessions is to make you, to help, to empower you to actually begin systematically. Do you have any opinion on this, Radhi?
That's awesome. I have nothing to add. Are Canto 2 and 3 available in the UK? Sapna Mataji asks.
Yes, on Amazon, UK, Amazon, these books are available. And I also want to take this opportunity to let everybody know that these Canto 1, which is right now in 2 volumes, and Canto 3 in 2 volumes, will very soon be out in 1 volume, even in the United States and elsewhere in the Western world. Canto 1 is going to be available very soon, and Canto 2, a new version of that. It's the same book. It's just things have been updated. And Canto 3 will be available in 1 month, which will be in 1 volume. However, they are available now, even in 2 volumes. So they are available in UK, in Europe, rest of Europe and America, Australia, all on Amazon.
Somebody had asked, in fact, a few people had asked me from last session, because they're seeing these updated Canto 1 and updated. And I said, I'm teaching from the old ones, I got them when they first came out and it's the same material and it's just, as nice. It's just, made into 1 volume. But I have not even seen the newer versions because I've been used to the original printing of the books. So whether you use the original, batch of books or the ones that are coming out now, I think they're all great.
Yeah, the material inside has not changed at all. It is simply to bring the prices down to, mainly to bring the prices down and to make it more accessible to everyone. That is really the goal.
Sarayu Mataji asks, I discussed Srimad Bhagavatam with my son without handing the book to him because I have a fear that my younger son can tear it. Is it okay? Or should I do it with Bhagavatam in his hand?
No, this is fine. This is fine to not give him the Bhagavatam and to keep the Bhagavatam and to just let him hear. Because if he cannot even read, then there's no purpose in giving him the Bhagavatam until he comes to that age where he can responsibly hold the book.
I'm monitoring the questions. Okay, so we have a question about where can we find the Srimad Bhagavatam Comprehensive Guide for Young Readers? And I guess I can go ahead and send a link in the chat box for Amazon, as well as we have, Golden Media links for ordering. I'm not seeing, okay, Archana Mataji still has a question, perhaps because there are only 7 minutes left. You can unmute yourself and ask it so that it'll take some time to type it. Please go ahead, Archana Mataji. Yep, we can hear you.
Hare Krishna Mataji, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I actually typed the question already, so I think I raised the hand before that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? We have a comment from Priyanka Gohil. Hare Krishna, pranams Mataji. Thank you for the Srimad Bhagavatam classes. These are very helpful. Another question about teaching Bhagavatam to a 13-year-old. So she just started teaching her 13-year-old. Do you have any suggestions to offer them?
Yes, as the children, if you're teaching a teenager, accordingly the emphasis will change. We teach a young teenager more on a level of friendship, and our approach is more on a friendly level. But also the discussion can naturally go deeper. It's more like the why and the hows rather than the what happened. We go deeper and we ask the how and why questions. So in this way, the nature, like I mentioned earlier, Bhagavatam is taught in layers. So the layer for an older child will naturally go deeper, and the emphasis becomes different. But other than that, the process is the same. The key thing is to remember is to try to do it, and not initially it may be hard, and you may have a hard time putting the child to sit down and hear. But my experience myself and with others has been that once you begin and you just take the plunge and you just do it, then somehow the Bhagavatam attracts itself to us.
Question from Sapna Mataji. You explained the level of speakers like Parikshit Maharaj and Sukadeva being Uttama, and Shaunaka Rishi and Sukadeva Gosvami on the lower level. Can you please explain this again?
No, not Sukadeva Goswami and sages. Well, it's mentioned in the Bhagavatam that the sages initially, when they did the yagya, it was meant to go to Swarga. This was meant for the heavenly planets, and they and that's why it's mentioned how they were so frustrated because the yagya was going on for 1,000 years and they were covered with black soot, And at that point, Sutta Goswami walks in, and having met such a pure devotee, their and hearing Bhagavatam from him, their hearts became purified. So it's considered to be on the Kanishta level. That's how the acharyas explain. And then and then the conversation between Narad Muni and Vyasadeva is considered more on the Madhyam level, because Vyasadeva is more on the level of being lamenting and despondent, But when you see the level of Parikshit Maharaj and Sukadeva Goswami, is at a totally different level. Parikshit Maharaj has given up his kingdom, he's given up eating and drinking. He's totally in the mood that Bhagavatam wants to, highlight. Is the goal of Bhagavatam is to eventually give up, to approach it with no desires, with detachment. And like it says, the Bhagavatam is a literature for the Paramahansas, but it doesn't mean that people like us cannot approach it, because we can benefit from that and come to that level.
Next question: are the guidebooks useful for children that are 11 years old?
Yes. It is helpful, and because the way these books are made is that you can actually adapt it to your needs. If the child is older, then you can actually take those activities. No, and the activities are for every chapter. They have a variety of activities. There are some activities for younger children and some for older children. So you can pick and choose. Now, as the cantos are getting further advanced, like we are working on fourth canto now, we are doing it more for older children, because we are assuming that the child will begin from canto 1. And by the time he goes to canto 4, he's going to be older, right? How old is your children, Radhika Mataji, and how old would they be when they...
Right. Yeah. And so, one is 10 already. And so, yeah, very much applicable. And then somebody who joins us on Zoom, we have 2 that are 11. So actually there's a lot. And in fact, you can do everything with them. There's a lot of higher thinking questions and, higher order, things that encourage higher order thinking and analytical questions and analyzing the Bhagavatam. So, we know Bhagavatam is for every age, right? From the womb to, your deathbed. And similarly, the guidebooks, I personally use them for my own Bhagavatam study, and so do other adults that have no children at all, also use them for their own study. I think 1-year-old would really enjoy the book.
The Vrindavan Gurukul, they use it for their middle school children. That's their target. Right now, they have not introduced it to primary school as yet. They're hoping to. So that means children between the ages of 11 to 14. So they've been using it for the past several years now. And they're teaching English language also through those books. Go ahead.
Should we also read Sanskrit shlokas with children, particularly key verses?
The key verses in the guidebook, yes, you can do those, definitely. But in terms, when you're doing the discussion, I would not recommend reciting the Sanskrit verses. You could, it's always so purifying, but what happens is I found that experience to slow down the discussion process and make it delayed, and in this way sidetracked. So because we really want to get intensely into the discussion. Discussion is, like I mentioned last time, is a very powerful process of assimilating the material more deeply, and also for cultivating all types of wonderful skills, such as good reasoning and critical thinking, which translates into every area of our life. It becomes beneficial.
And I have learned the system that Arudha Mataji uses, when she teaches Bhagavatam to children, where she always recites the first verse of the chapter with them, and then they recite responsively, and then also they have an opportunity to try to recite the Sanskrit, and then everybody else says in unison. So we do recite a verse every time we're reading Srimad Bhagavatam, so they have that practice of reading Sanskrit from the Bhagavatam and reciting. Perhaps this will be our last question. For 12 to 14-year-olds, would you still recommend reading the story summary and questions? I would imagine this is the higher order questions, higher thinking questions, after Prabhupada's translations.
For a 14-year-old, yes.
12 to 14, yes.
12 to 14, yes. Definitely, these books are, like I said, when we're getting into now the third and fourth canto, it is more for older children. There's more activities geared for this age group, and also for younger children. We try to give a variety so that children who started very early can also take advantage of that.
Okay, 2 minutes after the hour, and we've pretty much exhausted all our questions. We have lots of comments. Thank you everyone for your encouragements. We have a lot of thank yous on YouTube as well as in Zoom. So Arudha Mataji, anything you'd like to say in closing?
Thank you all for your enthusiasm to come weekly for these classes. I know a lot of you are hearing the recording afterwards, but yeah, I plan to continue with them as long as everybody wants it and is able to listen. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Until next week, we'll be back to our regular schedule. So, whatever that translates in terms of your time zone, it's 7:30 Central Time, so 7:30 to 9 U.S. Central Standard Time. And I'll send a reminder in the WhatsApp groups. Thank you. Hare Krishna.